Cloaked in the shadows.
Okay, Amanda, what are we doing today?
Doing Cloaked in the Shadows.
What is Cloaked in the Shadows?
It's a paranormal, strange, anything ghost type of podcast.
Yeah, and we've got a guest with us today as well. We've got a wonderful lady. And we've been really enjoying chatting to her before we even started recording here because we had some issues with the pictures on this thing before we even started. So I'm glad it's audio today. We've got the fantastic Rissa Miller with us now. Rissa, I'm not even bothering telling what sort of things you're involved in because you're like us two. You're a lady of many trades. I think that's the best way of putting it, isn't it? So
Absolutely, yes.
now, obviously, people are wondering, obviously, you're originally from Pennsylvania, right? Now in Baltimore. So tell us a bit about yourself and where all your creativity came from originally.
Originally, I think I was born this way, to be totally
Best
honest.
way.
And, ultimately, I do a lot of different things and I wear a lot of different hats, but I would tell you I'm a storyteller. Whether I'm working as a ghost tour guide or I'm doing divination or it's a writing endeavor, it's always storytelling. That is what I do. That is my creative calling. And it has many mediums when I pick up a pen or a paintbrush or a microphone. It doesn't matter. It's just the medium. At the end of the day, it's always about the story.
Brilliant. So, and we'll come on to the stories a bit more in a bit because I know what Drew was going to talk to you first of all, and I'm going to ask you first of all about your smoke readings. So
Hmm.
I've never even heard of smoke readings. I know Amanda's first question. I've heard of the first thing Amanda's going to ask you about, but I've not heard of smoke readings. So tell us what smoke readings are if people don't know.
Absolutely. So, smoke is one of the oldest mediums for divination known to humankind. And it was practiced by the oracles of Delphi. And basically, anytime you see smoke, you can look into it and see pictures. So, think of incense burning in your home or a campfire in front of you. In both cases, you will look into the smoke and there are forms. And one of the most exciting things about smoke divination, it's also called capnomancy, is that it moves in real time. So if the smoke is not influenced by something else, say, an open window, if you're in a nice still environment, the smoke will move and turn with your questions. So it's absolutely fascinating to watch. It's really beautiful. You can't do it everywhere because you have to be safe. Obviously, you're still it's a kind of pyromancy. So you're
Yeah,
still dealing
I
with
can see the
fire.
problems of this. Yeah.
Yeah, you're still dealing with fire. People are like, "Oh, can you come do it at my art gallery?" No, that's not safe. We're not gonna. It's a hard no. I'm not gonna do smoke reading in an art gallery, damage the paintings with smoke, burn the place down. No, but it is definitely a more esoteric feeling, and yet I always tell people give it a try, and you'll see how intuitive it really is. If you are tuned in enough to your intuition to open up, you will see pictures in the smoke. Now, the second half of that, just like with tea leaf reading, is interpreting the pictures. Now, that's a whole other ball of wax. And it does require a little bit of skill to do that. But the first part of smoke reading, tea leaf reading, any kind of scrying is seeing the pictures, allowing yourself to see them.
That's it. What? Okay, we'll have to ask you then. Why smoke reading then? Where did this interest
Uh,
come from?
So I've had an interesting journey in divination. I am a third generation tarot reader.
Oh,
And basically, that meant that somewhere around my teen years, I decided to rebel against that and do something different. I'm like, well, if this is what my family does, I'm not gonna. Which of course was silly. And I look back now and I think, why did I do that? But who knows what goes through the mind of a teenager. That said, when I was a teenager, I started tea leaf reading, and that is when I started creating my symbol language. And I took that years later and just applied the same language of symbology to smoke.
ah,
And I would tell you that it was actually smoke cleansing that made me fall in love with smoke, which is not divination. It's about clearing a space. And I I was going through a rough time. I felt the energy in the house was stagnant and stuck and just really yucky. And just cleaning wasn't cutting it. Like just getting it clean and opening the windows, it wasn't enough. There was energetic residue. Um, and it's hard to quantify what energetic residue might be, but you could say it's just old stuck emotions, stale energy, even just stale air, anything that needs to be moved in the space that you're in. So I feel like everybody recognizes that feeling. Like when I start to describe it to someone, they're like, I know what you mean. We've all been somewhere. Even offices can often have that sort of like stale, stuck feeling because so many of them, at least in the US, the windows never open. They literally seal them shut. And talk about a bunch of frustrated people stuck in an office together, all feeling their feelings, and then there's no airflow at all. That is a recipe for stuck energy right there. So I feel like almost everybody can relate to that. They've either been in a shop or an office or something. Even sometimes apartment buildings, when the windows don't open the whole way, you could feel it. You could just feel when there's that stuckness. So that's how I fell in love with smoke. And when I would burn my herbs, I fell in love with the beauty of them. And I started seeing patterns. Right around the same time, this is quite a few years ago, I ran into a psychic who did capnomancy. It was one of her specialties. And she taught me. So she taught me her system. And I went from there using my own symbology and her teachings. And I created what works for me doing capnomancy. That was a long answer, but that's the whole story.
No, you need to clarify it right away, so I agree with you. And Amanda, because I know she's got the second part of this, really, haven't you?
Yes. What advice would you give to anyone who wants to get into tea leaf reading and doesn't know where to start?
Just do it. So you have to just do it. The thing about any kind of divination, it's really easy to get hung up on the details. And I fell in love with tea leaf reading by accident. My mom gave me a fancy thing of tea. I was like 16 for the holiday, and it came with this metal tea ball, which was a total piece of junk. I mean, it broke the first time I used it, and it was a good thing. Maybe it was fate, because at that moment I saw the tea start sticking to the inside of my cup, and it wasn't even a proper tea cup at the time. It was just a mug like this, and we had proper teacups in the house, but most Americans, we drink out of these. And I saw a cat. The first thing I saw was a cat. And I said, oh my gosh, there's a cat on my teacup. And my mom said, that's a form of divination. Why don't you go with it? Maybe this will be your thing. And I saw a cat, I saw a basket, I saw a flower. I started keeping a notebook. At the time, there was no internet. This was over 20 years ago.
Wow.
Actually, it was over 30 years ago. There was no internet. My local library in the small town where I grew up did not have any books on tea leaf reading. In fact, I think there might have only been the guide by the Highland Seer at that time on the market anyway. And that book was written in the late 1800s by some mysterious person who was from Scotland, who will never know who they were. But that was the only book around at the time. I didn't even know about it then. I literally kept notes. I decided how to read the tea, and then I used my own intuition to decide what the symbols meant. And that's still the format I use today. So if somebody wants to learn tea leaf reading, they don't have to do it that way, but they do have to trust themselves. You have to be able to look at what looks like a mess of tea in a cup and find the symbols in it. It's no different than looking at clouds or gazing into water to do scrying, or gazing into a mirror lit by a candle, or gazing into smoke. All of these things are forms of scrying, basically. You can use wax, you can use metal, you can use ash. And once you have a symbol language, you can do all of them, which is kind of amazing. You can decide, today I'm going to scry into the ash, and you can do it because you can see the symbols and you have a language to read them. So When I do tea leaf reading, because I started out doing drawings, I still do drawings for everyone. My drawings look like
Now,
this.
people want to bear in mind this is an audio podcast only,
Right,
so we have to
right, right,
actually
right.
listen to us explain to people what you're drawing is you just show us.
So the drawing I'm showing right now is a pen and ink drawing. So basically everybody who gets a tea leaf reading from me also gets an original piece of art that is a pen and ink drawing of all of the symbols in their cup. Now, the one I just showed you, it's an interesting cup. It has animals, it has structures, it has numbers and letters, and then it has more esoteric symbols as well. And like it has a person riding a unicorn. It has a peacock. It has the Bride of Frankenstein. It has all kinds of things going on in it, and no
Is
two
that a
cups.
sort of normal sort of reading you do for people? Like, because like I said, you just taught all kinds of images and fragments there in one go.
So basically, every cup tells a story.
Hmm.
Every cup tells a story. And when somebody calls me or messages me and says, I need a career reading, or I need a reading about my house, or about my loved one, or, XYZ, I always try to tell them it's never going to be just that. It's going to be a look at your whole life. It's going to be a reflection of everything happening now. And that's what you see. It looks like a lot. And when you see these drawings, there's a lot going on, there's a lot happening. And I always tell people this is like the next 6 months in a teacup. um, Teacups are fantastic in that one little cup, that one tiny little vessel, enough symbols will come out to guide you through a period of time that's 4 to 6 months long. And they will give you a true reflection, which isn't always what people want. People don't always want a true reflection of what's going on. Sometimes people want to hear only good news, or they only want to hear that their house is going to sell right away. And that's just not always the case. The teacup will give back a true reflection of what's going on and what they actually need to take action on. And that's the other piece. You're given this information, but what do you do with it? If someone is seeking from a teacup or from smoke or from tarot cards or whatever, you're going to be given information that you can either sit on or you can act on.
Plus Mandrovsky, Mandras about the TV screens there. What do you think of?
Yeah, I did tarot reading for a little while, so I
Mm-hmm.
can sort of understand that with the not wanting to hear bad news. I won't name anyone or go into like specifics, but somebody asked me a question and the answer was no, and I couldn't really tell them because I knew them personally as well, so I had to sort of go around the answer to tell them.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that.
It's actually, I don't like to read for people I'm very close to. I occasionally will, but I prefer to read for strangers just because of that.
Yeah.
I'm not I'm biased when I read for people I care about. I'm biased.
Yeah, I think you do. It's like they don't say. I remember that when Amanda mentioned it there. Now we did that in Cheat Mill, didn't you, before we got married? Yeah. Yeah, I remember that because it was on. You sat there thinking yourself like, "Oh, this is a bit too close to home. This I'm going to be very careful what I say." And that's what you like, weren't you?
I wasn't going to say yes and promise them something that wasn't going to happen, but on the other hand, I couldn't say no, so I had to do a sort of a roundabout way of it.
Yeah, it can be difficult for sure. Nobody wants to deliver bad news at a reading. But the other thing, my favorite tarot card is the Wheel of Fortune, because it always reminds you that what goes down will come up. And even if you're going through a hard time, you're just going through it. It doesn't define you.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think we could go on for ages this topic, definitely. But there is a few other things we want to do today, so we're going to move on. And I think this could be a two-part session as well, but we'll do it all in one go. So, okay, I'm going to move on now because, as we said before, me and Amanda are writers anyway. So I know you, when you people look at your website, you'll see lots of bits and pieces, services you offer already. But yeah, one that caught my eye was, and this is why I know you've told us already what you live in is off this, what you do already. Well, you can come on to that if you want to. But the one that caught my eye was writing poets or poems for non-poets. Now, I'm very interested in learning what do you mean by that, and how does that work?
So I have been part for a long time of an organization in Maryland called Maryland Writers Association. And after many years, I saw this strong mental block by a lot of people against poetry. And the thinking was always, I'm not a poet. I'm not that artistic. I'm not that creative. I can't use language that way. And I just didn't think that was true. Especially after reading some of their fiction and creative nonfiction, I was like, you are a poet, actually. You're just not seeing it in yourself for whatever reason. So I created a workshop that I've given quite a few times, and people always receive it very well. And it's about learning to recognize poetic language. And it basically breaks down how to take a regular word, say walk. I walked down the street. How can you make that a little more poetic just by changing the word that you use? Instead of walk, how about saunter? I sauntered down the street is very different. So I teach people to make small changes in their writing, and from that point to find their poetic voice. And some people have taken it and then gone on to write entire collections of poetry because they didn't know they had it in them, but they did. All along, they did. And it's incredibly rewarding to see people find their own creativity that was just buried underneath self-doubt.
That's all it is sometimes with poetry, is, and I'm going to give you Manny's opinion in a minute as well. But I'm always the opinion of, like, if you find it's the starting pistol out and say something that starts you off, you can then run with it. And like I started, I've been writing since I was 10, so I've got 41 years experience of poetry. Less so nowadays, but I still do it. It's like I found that very early on. You were a little bit later, Amanda, weren't you, with poetry?
Yeah, I used to write depressing song lyrics when I was a teenager.
Yeah, but then it went into depressing stories when you got older, didn't it? So yeah, that's why more of it were funny. So that's great stuff. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to say, as I knew this one for a while, so we're going to do one more topic in this first part.
Okay.
Great. And what we'll do is part two will obviously follow straight after. Amanda.
Right, so I was going to ask about the ghost tours that you do, and have you ever been halfway through the ghost tour and you've seen an actual ghost? And if so, how did you react to that?
Well, wouldn't that be lovely? But no, it's actually pretty rare to have any kind of encounter. So I have been a ghost tour guide for I think 5 years now. I've been a history tour guide much longer. I love history. And I think one of the reasons I especially love ghost tours is they give people a window into history that otherwise they might not ever have stepped through. And it sort of opens up this experience of history that gives it a voice and a place and a face that they might never have encountered before or cared about, and then suddenly they will. So I do ghost tours in both Maryland and Pennsylvania, and I've personally had ghost experiences, usually right before or right after the tour, when it's just me and or me and one other person, something like that. And I did give a ghost tour once that people had their dogs along. There were, I think, 8 or 9 dogs, and we walked up to a site called Cat Run Rock. And during the American Civil War, a lot of people died there. It was a field hospital outpost. It was very sad. It's a very sad story. And suddenly, out of nowhere, all of these dogs started barking at the same time. There was nothing behind me except the giant rock. And all the people's pictures showed orbs floating all around me. There was no light that should have been creating them, because it's actually pretty easy to fake an orb if you use a backlight. And everybody's pictures were very similar. It's impossible to believe they all had the same dust specks on their camera. That's probably the most lively group experience that I've ever seen on a ghost tour. Now, that said, I've definitely had my own ghost experiences on and off literally since I was a child. I have always been a little bit sensitive, even when I try not to be. Somehow, somehow they know those of us that hear them. And I feel like ghosts deserve a little more compassion. I feel like ghosts deserve their voice. I don't I know there are ghost hunting groups that go in and do things like bang on walls and yell at ghosts. And I think to myself, if you were living in a space, would you want someone to come in and do that to you? I don't think that's a great way to approach anything. Ghost, dog, person, anything.
course.
I
Okay.
I always approach with compassion, and if a ghost reach out to me, I assume that it wants or needs something. That it's probably not just making idle chit chat. So I try to stay open. If I'm getting a message or I'm seeing an image, I assume it's there for a reason. And yes, this happens during readings too. I have definitely had people reach through when I'm doing tea leaf readings or smoke, especially in the smoke. It's very easy for that energy to be moved by a spirit. So I've definitely seen that happen.
Fascinating.
That was a long answer to your question, but
No,
yes, I do go
I find it
source.
really fascinating that. I'm wondering, is
Yeah.
anything about to that?
Oh no.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's really, I mean, it's a great way of finishing part one, I think. And yeah, I had the feeling when people wonder if sometimes we did podcasts, we try to give you themes that the guests here what we're going to talk about. And we've covered 20 minutes already. So I thought, no, I knew it was going for a while. So we'll split it to 2 shorter episodes. So hang around, everybody. We will see you all.
Cloaked in the shadows.